Good evening. My name is Lori Zabata, and I'm a proud JWU alumna and the Director of Alumni Relations at Johnson & Wales University. Thank you for joining us for today's session titled Sip with JWU, Pinot Noir, Coastal versus Inland. We're excited to bring this program to you virtually and look forward to this walkthrough of the history, styles, tasting, and pairing notes of this lighter, summer perfect red wine, Pinot Noir. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. With the exception of the presenters, all participants have been muted. Please leave your cameras turned off until the tasting portion of the presentation. When directed, if you'd like to turn your camera on, please do so. If you'd like to ask a question, please do so in the chat feature. We will refer to this section to take questions at the conclusion of the presentation. Set your view to speaker view in the top right corner of your screen. This will be the best way to see our presenter. During the presentation portion, we suggest selecting Show Small Active Speaker Video as the view, which is the middle option on the top left of the menu items. Since we can't be together in person for this program, please keep it social. Feel free to share pictures of your at-home setup, a selfie, or photo of who you're enjoying this session with. Be sure to tag at JWU Alumni in your posts on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I'd like to thank the Alumni Relations team for their help behind the scenes of today's session, especially Lauren Anderson, Manager of Alumni Relations, for her work to bring this program to us. I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Patrick Sullivan, class of 1994. Patrick began his career in the hospitality industry at the age of 15, back in his home state of New Jersey. He wore many hats: dishwasher, cook, bartender, and server. This is where his passion for the industry grew. Hotel restaurant management was clearly where he wanted to be. He enrolled at Johnson & Wales University in Providence, graduating with his BS in hospitality management in '94. Patrick then decided to expand his resume by working at hotel companies like Omni, Marriott, and Starwood. There, he dove into restaurant management, catering sales, and convention services. To broaden his experiences, Patrick jumped on an opportunity to work in the private club sector. His years at the exclusive Ocean Reef Club in Key Largo turned his eyes toward wine. He began studying and tasting wine as much as possible. In 2001, Patrick moved to Denver, Colorado, where after a few more years with Starwood, he was hired by the Republic National Distributing Company. He was a downtown sales representative for 5 years before he was plucked out of distribution by Jackson Family Wines. He began as a district manager for Colorado. Later, he was promoted to his current position, regional manager for Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming. He holds a first sommelier level with the Guild of Master Somms. Patrick lives in downtown Denver with his wife, Christy, JWU class of '96, and their son, Braden. We're so grateful to have him and his passion for wine with us this evening. Please join me in welcoming
I think I was just welcomed. Thank you, everybody. I'm really, really excited to be here today to talk about one of my great passions of wine. And also, I'm really grateful and honored to be with fellow alumni from Johnson & Wales. I'm very, like Lori said, a very proud graduate, 1994. And crossing my fingers, I have a 12-year-old who really wants to be a chef. So maybe there's some legacy involved here at some point. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with everybody so we can get the presentation started. Sorry. Okay. So like Lori said, we're going to be talking about Pinot Noir today, one of my all-time favorite varietals when it comes to wine. And we can't talk about Pinot Noir without talking about a little bit of history. It was first thought to be planted and made in the 1st century, but that really hasn't been proven. The winemaking has been made for centuries. A lot of people believe started in Asia. If you fast forward to 1375, it's actually the first time the term and the name Pinot Noir was seen anywhere. And then in 1880, was when the first planting of Pinot Noir was made in California. And it's actually an estate that's still around today called Inglenook. And they are credited with the first plantings of this grape in California. And then it grew from there. The mid 1800s, it made its way to New Zealand in the Otago region, which is still a very, very important region for Pinot Noir today. And in the 1945, there's an estate, Martin Ray, who's still around today as well. They are credited with making the very first 100% Pinot Noir wine ever in this country. And you might say, why is that important? Because before Martin Ray came around, and even today, there's a lot of blending with Pinot Noir of other grapes. And I can kind of get into that later. And then by the 1960s, it made its way to the very, very important region of Oregon, which is an area that's really on fire today for Pinot Noir, for those fans of this grape. Moving on to acreage, I'm not going to do a ton of these data slides. I'm going to bore the heck out of everybody, but I think it's important. For the longest time, the old world really ruled the acreage in the world. Champagne, obviously Pinot Noir is a big part of Champagne, Germany, and areas of France. However, America and the New World has taken over huge strides because the lots in France especially they're divided up as they get passed down generation to generation, and there's really no other place to plant new Pinot Noir in France. There's just no land left to go. So the New World took over and is really kind of leading the charge on this varietal. So now we'll get into a little bit of farming, which I work for a family company, and our owners say we're at the heart, we are farmers. And when it comes to Pinot Noir, it's a very finicky grape. It's very thin-skinned, which means it's very susceptible to disease, to mold, everything in its environment. And it is what they call a shy-bearing grape, which means the yields are not big when it comes to production and farming. It definitely can morph and change and adapt itself to whatever environment it's growing in, which sometimes is not a good thing. If you're growing Pinot Noir in a very warm climate, sometimes you can get a very astringent wine and it just doesn't come out the way it should, and you don't get the fruit and the flavor profiles that you need to get. So the farming practices are very, very important, and site selection is even more important with Pinot Noir. So now we're talking about winemaking itself, and a lot of this is dependent on a winemaker's preference. What flavors are they going to go for in the end product? And that's really, all of these styles are dependent on what the winemaker wants to do and what the end result is. From sorting, which in the old world, they always did whole cluster sorting, which means you snip the whole cluster off the vine and you crush the grapes with stems and everything, or you de-stem everything and crush the individual grapes, and it lends itself to different flavor profiles when you crush and sort with individual grapes or whole clusters. Fermentation is another huge aspect. When we're talking about maceration, is a fancy word there in the second bullet point. Maceration is the process of how long the skins stay in contact with your juice, which affects your color, affects your flavor, affects your aroma. It really affects everything. And then, of course, oak aging. That happens at the end. Again, as the wine sits in oak barrels, whether it be American or French, that gives a lot of different flavor to the wine as well. So Pinot Noir is a very distinct grape and has its own stylistic markers. And these are very general terms that you can look for when you're shopping for a Pinot Noir. If you're looking at a jumping point for getting into red wine, if you are a white wine drinker and you want to expand your palate and you want to get into red wine, Pinot Noir is a great jumping point. If you go from white wine to a very powerful Cabernet, it may turn you off to red wines. So I highly recommend to those of you out there that are thinking about getting into red, start with Pinot Noir. And the aromas, the acidity, the body, and the texture, these are all general terms that you'll get on the palate and in the nose of Pinot Noir. Obviously, this changes if you're having an Oregon Pinot or if you're having a California Pinot, and we'll get into that a little bit later. This is a great and helpful slide as well. Not only does it talk about the different fruits and spices and things that you get on Pinot Noir typically, but I think this really speaks to food pairing. Now, a great guideline to use with food pairing is either you want your food and your wine to be spot on match in flavors or the complete opposite. And what I mean by that is if you're having a butter poached lobster and you pair it with a nice California buttery Chardonnay, that's a great pairing. They complement each other. On the other side, say if you're having spicy Thai food, what you don't want to do, and it's all subjective, everybody drinks what they want to drink, but what you don't want to do is drink a high acid wine with spicy food like a Sauvignon Blanc, because it just accentuates the spice and heats things up a little bit more. So with spicy food, you should go a touch toward the sweeter side, like a nice Riesling or something like that. They complement each other really well. Now on this stylistic chart, this goes back to that fancy word I was talking about, maceration. Skin contact on the juice when it's being fermented. And the longer you have the skin in contact with the juice, the deeper color that you're going to get. And what everybody needs to know is no matter if you pick a green grape or a red grape, the juice is always white on the inside. So how to get those colors and the different structure in your wine is through that skin contact. Obviously at the extreme left is rosé, and that's very minimal skin contact. And then all the way to the right is long skin contact with deeper, darker Pinot Noirs. So it's a great little visual aid there for what you're looking for. Depending on what you're drinking, Pinot Noir, it really does fit into all these categories, depending on where you got your Pinot Noir from. Regional expressions, again, I touched on this a little bit with the stylistic slide that I had. And these are very helpful, especially if you're thinking about your menu that you're having for dinner and you go out and shopping for wine. But I would add a few things to these descriptors. In Oregon, not only are they fresh and firm, and firmness is in terms of the tannins and the tannin structure. I would also add earth to that. Oregon always has a really nice, most of the time, subtle, earthy tone to their wines. Excuse me. And now in California, you have Anderson Valley, firm and earthy as well. But Anderson also has this really nice spice factor to it, like baking spice too. to that area. Sonoma Coast and Russian River, round and forward, and forward meaning they're fruit forward. The fruit is the star on those wines. Monterey, earthy and juicy, and I would also say bright. Monterey has a touch more acid component to it, and it really brightens up the palate. And Santa Barbara, same thing, has a brightness to it, but that savory aspect comes from the maritime influence. It almost has a touch of brine to it. So really quick about the momentum of Pinot Noir. 1980 was the beginning, basically. This country was very late to the party, and really was still not being planted as much as other countries of the world. We were still going after the big grapes like Cabernet and things like that. I don't know where that line came from there. Sorry. And then I'm sure a lot of you on this call saw the movie Sideways. And believe it or not, it not only was it a cultural phenomenon, but it was a viticultural phenomenon. If you recall, Pinot Noir was a big part of that movie. And, you know, of course, there's that line, I'm not drinking bleeping Merlot. So it actually got to the point where winemakers were pulling up their Merlot vines to plant more Pinot Noir to meet up with the demand. So that's how big that movie was and how big of an effect it had. And then now the coastline, which we're going to get into on the Pacific, is a really, really booming area for Pinot Noir and very, very popular. So why do we go to the coast? Well, it's, like I said, Pinot Noir adapts itself to the environment that it's in, and it really, really loves cool climates and fog and a little bit of wind and a little bit of moisture in the air, and it really, really thrives. The way Pinot Noir grows in these tight clusters. In fact, Pinot Noir literally means pine black because of the tight clusters that look like pine cones. And that's where the name came from. So because of those tight clusters, they feed off each other and they feed off of the environment that they're in. And it's, again, the site selection for your grapes is really, really important. Okay, so we're going to get into some maps, and I'm a visual learner, as I know a lot of people are. I love maps. But also at this point, if you haven't opened your wine, why don't you go ahead and do that? I have a feeling most of you have already, and that's fine. I'm not judging because I did a while ago. So this is getting into California. This is Sonoma, situated there in Northern California. And on this slide, this is more of a topographical map of Sonoma County. And you'll notice, back to my point about the coastline, that all of these single vineyards, and please keep in mind, there are a lot more single vineyards in Sonoma County than this shows. These are just some really key ones that are out there. But you'll notice that a lot of them are clustered toward the coast, for the reasons that I spoke about. To get that maritime influence and to get the acid levels and the characteristics that they want on their grapes. And then we move south to Monterey. God, that line is really bothering me. I'm sorry. I don't know where it came from. Down to Monterey. And Monterey is actually considered what they call the salad bowl of the United States, because this area is where a lot of our produce, especially like lettuce, comes from. But this, you can see in the kind of grayish area of the Monterey Valley here, it acts as like a funnel for the winds and the weather that comes in from the Monterey Bay up there in the upper left-hand corner. And it's really a great, great place to grow Pinot Noir, and actually Chardonnay for that matter as well. And a kind of a neat geological tidbit is out in the bay is something called the Blue Canyon. And the Blue Canyon is actually deeper and wider than the Grand Canyon. It sits underneath the water, and when the cold, deep water comes from the canyon and blends with a little bit warmer water on the surface, that's where we get our weather patterns from in this area, and the fog banks that come in and ebb and flow in the vineyards and really, really nurture our grapes here. Okay, so hopefully everybody's sipping on some wine, and we can kind of get into the Sonoma versus Monterey discussion. And the fog versus wind. So on the left is the Sonoma side, and on the right is the Monterey side. And in the middle there, you can see those are some very general flavor profiles that you'll get in each one. So on the left side with Sonoma is fog that we talked about, and these fog banks come in the morning, and they really just kind of sit on the vineyards and create moisture levels and acid levels in the grapes. And then in mid-afternoon, it all gets burned off in the sun. As the sun goes down, fog will come in again a little bit, and like I said, just kind of ebb and flow in and out of the vineyards, and really helps the growing process. Sonoma has a lot of redwoods around. There is, millions of years ago, Sonoma basically was the ocean floor. So there's a lot of diatomaceous soil, which is basically fossilized plankton and seashells and things like that. And then on the Monterey side, I already started talking about that. They get a good amount of wind, like I said, in that funnel in the Monterey Valley, which it's a little bit difficult at times because a lot of wind actually hinders photosynthesis on the vines. If they are flowering and the flowers get a lot of wind, they protect themselves and they close up. So it actually extends our growing season in Monterey and extends our hang time at the clusters that hang on the vine. And, it's a little bit slower process there. So extreme coast versus inland. This is Sonoma coast on the left, and then Russian River on the right. And here's how you think about these different areas is because Russian River is actually a part of Sonoma. It's a sub-AVA, American Viticultural Area of Sonoma. So think about a target, and you have a wine that just has California designate on the label. Then you have one that's Sonoma, and then you have one that's Russian River. So the outer ring is like a California designate wine, and you come in and you have a single appellation wine, Sonoma, and then you have a single vineyard, you have a single county, and then you have a single appellation in Russian River. And then you go in even tighter into the center, the bullseye, if you will, to single vineyards. And all it is basically is more focus, and usually a lot less production when you get down to those single vineyards, because essentially they're just one vineyard for that wine. So you're not going to get the same yields that you would get from a California designate wine, which can come from Mendocino, can come from Sonoma, it's as long as it's within California, you can have that on your label. I'm gonna take a sip of wine. So Sonoma, we talked about already, really craggy coastline, really remote and really tough, rugged geology in a lot of areas. And typically you want to have a higher elevated vineyard on benchlands, hillsides, mountaintops, so that way they can be in and out of the fog line as that weather comes in. And then on the Russian River side, the biggest influence there is the river itself, which Russian River was named after years and years and years ago, Russian fur trappers that made their way down through Canada into California to this area and settled this area. And that's where the name Russian River came from. But the river itself, every year, actually swells and flows into any vineyards that are on its banks, which is not necessarily a bad thing because the very, very rich silt at the bottom of the river comes up and deposits itself into the vineyard and really kind of nurtures the vines. So this, getting toward the end here, and then we can get into some tasting and questions. But this is a great point of reference for everybody here. If you're out shopping at your local wine shop, liquor store, and you really have a flavor profile in mind in terms of Pinot Noir, or you have a dinner in mind, you're cooking at home, and you're cooking steak or chicken or what have you, this is a great guideline, very, very basic and easy for you to go by with your shopping, with the aromas and flavors and the structure from each major area, Oregon, and then 4 areas in California. Okay. And now I think it's okay for everybody to turn their cameras on, if you're so inclined, and we can get into some tasting. Okay. So obviously we're doing Sonoma versus Monterey. I like to do Sonoma first because Monterey has a little bit more acid to it. Sonoma is more fruit forward. And the reason why that is if you have a higher acid wine first, you're always going to have that acid on your palate. So I like to do higher acid wines last. So when you're looking at your wine and swirling your wine, obviously you're looking at the color, the very pale color, and to be honest, Pinot Noir should be translucent. It should not be opaque like a true Pinot Noir. You should be able to see through it. If you look straight down in your glass at the stem, you should be able to see the stem. If it's really, really dark and you can't see it, chances are it's not 100% Pinot Noir, and there is probably other grapes in there. Now swirling, and be very careful because you can swirl it right out of the glass. I've done that many times. Swirling basically aerates the wine. You're bringing oxygen and helping it to open up and get the aromas out and the flavors out. And then really probably the biggest, most important part of tasting is smelling. You get your nose way in the glass, and you get more as far as the tasting component of wine, you get more from smelling the wine than anything else. And you can already, on the Sonoma, you absolutely of course, I have my wine, you have yours. Hopefully they are Sonoma and Monterey. But you do get the hints of chocolate and the kind of darker berries, a little bit of blackberry on there, and even a touch of cranberry tartness that you can get on the nose. And there's no wrong answer. So, you know, when we get to Q&A and you want to talk about the flavor profiles, there really is no wrong answer. It's very, very subjective. Everybody's palate and nose is different. I mean, you can't say, oh, this smells like hot dog water, because that's ridiculous. But it's all very, very subjective. So don't be afraid to come out and say, oh, I get this. It took me a long time to come up with my own descriptors and my own adjectives when it comes to wine. I had to hear other people say, oh, I get cherry, I get cranberry and blackberry and that kind of thing. And I'd be like, oh yeah, I get that too. So that's the Sonoma. And then I'm gonna switch to Monterey. Hopefully I'm not boring the hell out of everybody.
Not at all, but I'd love to just interrupt for one quick second before we move on from Sonoma. Can you just talk a little bit about what kinds of food you would pair with a Sonoma wine versus a Monterey?
Yeah. The first thing is Pinot Noir in general is a very, very versatile grape. It goes with a lot of foods across the board. With the fruit component and a bit deeper tannins, I actually have had Sonoma Pinot Noir with steak, and it works totally fine. I'm sorry, was there another question? No, okay. And it goes totally fine. And then, as you know, since I just poured here, we'll click over to Monterey. Since I just poured Monterey, and see, if you have Monterey in your glass, you can tell it's a very, very different nose on, and that tea leaf is spot on. You get a little bit more of an herbaceous quality with Monterey. And so Monterey Pinot, to Lori's question, I've had this with an herbed like chicken dish that works really, really well. You can't go crazy with the herbs because you don't want that to overpower your wine, but a little bit of rosemary on some chicken goes really, really great with this wine. But again, you know, we're looking at the color, very, very pale and see-through. We're aerating it to let it open up. And you can do a little experiment. Pour the wine and let it sit for a few seconds and don't swirl it, but smell it. And then swirl it and smell it, and you'll see a huge difference in the nose. And you can do that with any wine, not just Pinot Noir. So yeah, on the palate, you get just a little bit brighter. Like I said, a touch more acid. I know I've said that a lot. And basic palate notes for yourself. Tannins dry your mouth out. Acids make your mouth water. Okay? So if you want to go back to the Sonoma and then go back to the Monterey, you'll notice that you're salivating more with the Monterey than you are with the Sonoma. And that's where the acid comes in. Okay. Do we want to field some questions?
Yeah, I'll be the one to take the questions from the chat box. So if you have any questions for Patrick, whether it's about what you're tasting now or another Pinot Noir that you are a fan of, feel free to ask the questions in the chat function. Our first question from Lori: why is Pinot Noir pricey?
great question. And I get this a lot, especially in my sales role. Pinot Noir is pricey. Again, it goes back to the beginning of my presentation that it's a very, very finicky grape and very thin-skinned grape that's susceptible to all kinds of mold and disease and things like that. The other side of it is when you're farming Pinot Noir, as with a lot of grapes, a lot of winemakers, they do this kind of sacrificial cluster. So as they're going down the rows of vines, they will literally clip whole clusters off and just let them drop and rot and, you know, kind of go back to the earth. And the reason for that is when you think about it, the grapes are the vine's children. And if the energy of the vine is split off and spread too thin into too many areas and too many clusters, you're not going to get the vigor that you need, the flavors that you want. So you cut off some clusters so that the energy of the vine is more concentrated. And so that's another part. You know, it's an expensive venture. You know, every winemaker and estate owner I've ever spoken to has said, you don't get into wine to make money. You have to have money first. So Pinot Noir is definitely up there as, you know, one of the more expensive ones to make. And it depends on where it's from as well. If you're drinking a Premier Cru Burgundy that is, you know, elite and very, very small lot, like I said, they get passed down generation to generation and often get parceled off and reduced even more. So you're talking very, very focused and low yields there.
Great, thank you. Russ would like to know what affects whether the tannins are strong or soft.
So that is definitely a great question. That's definitely the weather and the winemaking process. So if you're fermenting in, you know, with skins, and the longer you keep the skins on the juice, the more tannic structure you're going to have. And also it goes back to that whole cluster crushing that I was talking about earlier. If you use the whole cluster, you're getting the stems, you're getting everything, and that adds to the tannins as well. So it depends on the method. That's really where the tannic structure comes from.
Great. Amanda would like to know, what is your favorite cheese and meat pairing for Pinot Noir?
Oh, great question. I'm a cheese lover. I haven't met a cheese I didn't like. But I love Gruyere, a nice Swiss Gruyere with Pinot Noir. It's, you know, if you get one that's like about 6 months aged, it's not quite as pungent then. If you go a lot longer than that, you're going to get, you know, more of those ammonia flavors that may overpower the wine and things like that. So look for something that's kind of young aged, but Gruyere is fantastic. And even, it sounds boring, but even a mild to medium cheddar works really, really well with Pinot Noir. You don't want to go with like a very, very sharp cheddar because again, it will probably overpower the wine and just won't complement each other. And then what was the other part of the question? Meat?
Meat, yep.
Yeah, I think that goes back to Lori's question of, you know, I've had the Sonoma with a steak. I've had the Monterey with an herb chicken. And like I said, Pinot Noir in general is a very, very versatile wine. And yeah, those are the two examples that come to mind as far as protein is concerned.
Great. So I believe you might have touched on this a little bit, but Nancy would like to know, how does one learn how to identify the notes? She smells familiar scents, but how do you learn to break them down and identify them?
It's a tasting. Tasting is the absolute best teacher. Go out, you know, obviously you don't have to spend thousands of dollars at your wine shop or liquor store, and just grab whatever you're tasting, different Chardonnays, Pinot Noirs, Cabernets, whatever, and just grab things from different areas. And like I said, it took, when I first started in this business, it took other people to tell me what they were getting. And I would identify like, oh yeah, I do get vanilla on that Chardonnay. I do get dark cherry on this Pinot Noir. And then after a while, as you taste more on your own and go to festivals, when they can happen again, go to festivals, go to food and wine shows and things like that. And just kind of have a plan and pace yourself and go around those rooms and those festivals and taste. It is absolutely the best teacher. And then you'll eventually come up with your own adjectives and your own descriptors. And like I said, there's no wrong answer. There really is no wrong adjective to use. Because, some our winemakers are the funniest because they come out with some of the greatest adjectives and descriptors you can think of, like pencil shavings, saddle, used saddle, leather, and things like that. So you can definitely come up with your own.
Great. Dion would like to know, should we be overly concerned with the vintage here?
Pinot Noir ages pretty well, but it's not like Cabernet or the bigger, more robust grapes. And you should, and the best thing to do when it comes to vintage is, look at the bottle in good light. And if it starts turning more brown than the red it's supposed to be, the chances are that either it's past its prime or it wasn't stored properly. Maybe it got hot and it kind of cooked a little bit. But if you're at a shop and you're looking at the color, that's a good signal as to whether it's good or not. But you definitely should be in tune to vintages. The Pinot Noir that I'm having right now, the Sonoma one, is a 2018, and this will be good 10, 12 years from now. After that, it's probably going to start kind of declining a little bit, losing its fruit component and losing its luster a little bit.
Great, good to know. Karen would like to know, she said, I just enjoyed a good Vin Gris. I do not see this very frequently. Why is it not more popular or available?
What was the name of it?
Vin Gris, Vingris.
Oh, Vin Gris. So like, I think it means like a Pinot Gris or something like that?
I believe so.
Yeah. Actually, Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio, they're kind of, Pinot Gris is an offshoot of Pinot Grigio. And very, very popular right now, actually. And I think in this country anyway, if we've found on the marketing side that if you put a fancy name on the wine, like Vin Gris, people don't know what that is. And they kind of like, all right, I'm just going to move on to the next thing. And that's just how trends work with wine. For a long time, there's a very, very famous estate and winemaker, Robert Mondavi, who I'm sure everybody's heard of. Excuse me. And he came up with the term Fumé Blanc, which is basically Sauvignon Blanc with just a little bit of oak on it. And they did pretty well with Fumé Blanc, but people just didn't, they would look at a shelf and say, I don't know what Fumé Blanc is. I'm going to have this Sauvignon Blanc as well, not realizing they were getting the same thing. So it's really a matter of perception. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. So Evan would like to know, so Monterey wines will have a more herb and woodsy complexity that you don't see in the Sonoma?
Yeah, typically, yeah. And honestly, some of it has to do with the oak treatment as well. But typically, yeah, it's going to have a touch more earth to it. and a little bit more herbaceous quality to it. You know, I even get, on the one I'm drinking anyway, I even get like a little bit of basil on mine, and other kind of cooking herbs. But the oak treatment definitely comes into play as well there.
Great. Charity would like to know, what is your favorite Pinot Noir, low in price and high?
Okay, I had a feeling this question would come up. And obviously I'm very biased toward my family. I love my Jackson family. And I'm drinking La Crema right now, which is one of my all-time favorites. But as far as kind of toward the lower end, I think Murphy Good out of California, Pinot Noir, great value, is fantastic. Also, there's another one called Carmel Road out of Monterey that is really, really good. And again, a great, great value. Both of those you'll find on the shelf in, you know, generally speaking, around under $15. So, you know, they could be good like house Pinot Noirs for you if you're looking for a house wine. And at the top end, I'm a huge fan of Oregon Pinot, and there is and I don't think it's super, super expensive. It's a little bit at the higher end, but there's one called Grand Moraine. It's 2 words, GranMoraine. And they're doing amazing, amazing things with Pinot Noir out there in the Willamette Valley in Oregon.
Great, thank you. All right. Mary would like to know, can you tell us why Pinot Noir likes a little wind, and does the wind somehow improve the health of the vines or the grapes themselves?
I'm sorry, Lauren, you cut out there for a second. Can you?
Okay, sorry. And if anyone's experiencing audio issues, we apologize. Zoom is having some technical difficulties, but can you tell us why Pinot Noir likes a little wind? And does the wind somehow improve the health of the vines or the grapes themselves?
It does in some ways, because of what the wind brings in. When I talk about the fog banks that come in, and it does bring a little bit of moisture, especially on those coastlines. You're going to get moisture from the bays and the oceans, and the wind. As I was saying before, the vines like wind to a point. After a while, if it gets really windy, the flowers close up and it pretty much shuts down photosynthesis, and the kind of winemakers have to wait for everything to pass. But they do acclimate themselves, Pinot Noir vines acclimate themselves to a little bit of wind and cooler areas on the coast. And again, with those fog banks that the wind brings in, it really helps with the acid levels that you want to get in the grapes. Now, you can get too much, obviously. You can get too much moisture, which results in mold, which is a huge, huge bad thing for grapes. So it's you're at the mercy of Mother Nature, and it's it's kind of a tightrope you're walking, because it could go either way. But wind for sure is very, very important.
Great. Daniela would like to ask, can you please give us a refresher about the legs? Slow means more alcohol, correct?
No, not necessarily. So, well, let me talk about alcohol really quick too, because when you put your nose in the wine and you feel like a little bit of burn on your nose, that's the alcohol. And if you feel a lot of burn, that means that the wine is higher in alcohol. And if it's a subtle burn, then it's lower in alcohol. Really, the legs, I've always been told, and I've always learned that it's more about the body of the wine. So Pinot Noir, you're going to have legs that in general run down the glass fairly quickly comparatively to other wines. And it does have a little bit to do with the sugar content The slower the legs on the glass, you're probably going to have a little bit more sugar content in the wine, and that means that the body of the wine is a little bit heavier. It's got a little bit more viscosity to it. But you know, I'm sure everybody's kind of swirling their wine right now, and if you notice, the legs run down pretty quickly. So that means it's a little, I hate to use the word thin, but it's a thin bodied wine. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Love all the questions. These are great.
Yeah, and we're having a vibrant chat over here.
Good.
Valerie wanted to ask about sharing the slide of the aroma wheel. And Valerie, we did talk about sharing that in our follow-up email, so you will receive that, and also the expression grid that you can print off and keep with you when you're going to the wine store, just if you're interested in different styles and pairing notes and whatnot. So that is something that we will provide in the follow-up. And Barbara would like to know, do you like the cherry pie, the blend of the regions?
Oh, cherry pie, the wine?
Yeah, yep.
You know, it's been a long time since I've had it. The problem is in our business, when you work for one company, you kind of have this tunnel vision and you like only taste our wines and that kind of thing. I try to branch out and try different things as much as I can. I haven't had it in a long time. That's a solid wine. It's hopefully they haven't changed things, and I want to say it's been probably 5 years since I've tasted it. But I enjoy that wine. I enjoy it.
Great. We do have time for a couple more questions if anyone would like to add them in the chat. All right. Dion said, do you think the recent fires in Napa Valley will have an effect on the vine soil, mainly the ash?
It's unfortunately, there's the thing about the fires this year. Usually in California, these happen in October. And by the time the fires come in, harvest has already happened, which means that the grapes are off the vines and they're in the wineries themselves and protected. This year, the fires are early. And it's not so much the soil, because the soil will reinvigorate itself and get back to where it needs to be. And to be honest, excuse me, vines really don't thrive well in really rich soils. You want vines to struggle in really dry soils where they have to reach down really far for any kind of moisture or anything like that. And it creates the vigor in the wine, and it creates the certain characteristics. And you want them to struggle. You want your vines to struggle. So the soil is not really so much a factor. It's the smoke. So the smoke and ash. So if the grapes are still on the vine and there's a lot of smoke around them and ash around them, that might be a problem. It still remains to be seen here this year because the skin of grapes are very porous. And this happened back in 2008 as well in Sonoma. And there were a couple bottles that I opened that people decided to make their wine anyway. And as soon as you opened it, it smelled like a campfire. And it's just a turnoff right away. So that smoke, it's smoke taint is what they call it. So the smoke taints the skins and the juice, and it's just not the wine you want to put out, which obviously that is really, really expensive. If you can't put out your product, we'll see what happens this year.
We will. So a few questions that are similar, so I'll paraphrase them both.
Okay.
But Russ was asking about a little bit more about becoming a sommelier.
Mm-hmm.
And Bill said something similar about what kind of advice would you give for someone who is passionate about wine like yourself and would love to get more involved in this field?
Okay. So before I got into this as a profession, it was really a hobby of mine. And I tasted on my own. This goes back to somebody else's question about, you know, how do I come up with my own adjectives and descriptors and things like that? It's tasting, tasting, tasting. So taste as much as you can. I can certainly recommend some great books if you really want to geek out on wine. And I can always email that to you, Lauren, and we can put it in your follow-up email if you want. And once you get to a certain point that you're comfortable, there's a lot of organizations out there that would love passionate people like yourself. Like the Guild of Master Soms is one for sure, and they have, you know, different levels of certification, and all the way up to Master Som. Excuse me. And start with tasting, read as much as you can, and then, you know, you can kind of enroll in these tasting organizations and get certified.
Great. So we have time for one more question, Patrick, and this question is from Marty. How do you think the new Petaluma Gap AVA and Sonoma Coast AVAs compare to the Willamette region?
Wow. That's a cool question. All right. So I'm really excited about the Petaluma Gap AVA. And our family makes a couple wines from the Petaluma Gap. So what you have to know is, like, in super basic terms, in how an AVA, an American Viticultural Area, gets certified as an AVA. Among 1,000 other things, one of the main things that has to happen is you have to have some kind of natural phenomenon that sets your AVA apart from every other AVA. So in the case of Petaluma Wind Gap, there's a notch in the mountain range, right? The Mayacamas Mountains, right there at the Petaluma. And what happens is wind comes through that notch and swirls around. That's the Petaluma Gap, swirls around that area and creates its own little microclimate. And that's how basically the Petaluma Gap got certified as an AVA. And I got excited about the first part of the question, and I forgot about the second part of the question. What was the second part?
That's okay. And compare the Petaluma Gap and Sonoma Coast AVAs to Willamette region.
Oh, okay. So Petaluma is, obviously you have that natural phenomenon that I just described. It's not quite as coastal. It does get a little bit of coastal influence, but if you do the true Sonoma Coast, there are some vineyards where you can literally see the ocean and see waves crashing. So there's a little bit more of a maritime influence there. In Oregon is a really interesting and beautiful area. You have the two mountain ranges that actually sit on either side of the Willamette Valley. And a lot of people think of Oregon as a lot of rain, you know, because it's, you know, part of the Pacific Northwest, but they don't get a ton of as much rain as people think because of the coastal mountain range that's right there on the west coast of the Willamette Valley. And there's also a big influence as far as a large mushroom bed that grows throughout Willamette Valley that contributes to the earthy tones that you get in Oregon Pinots. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, so we have some more questions, Patrick. We will send them to you to answer, and we will follow up with people after the session, just since we're short on time and we want to be aware, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, for leading us on tonight's tasting experience with Pinot Noir. It was such an informative and interesting discussion about the distinct differences between the growing regions of Sonoma and Monterey. We're grateful that you shared your time with us this evening and really appreciate your insight on this wine variety. Your passion for this topic is so appreciated. We'd also like to thank all of our alumni attendees for joining us tonight. Whether you graduated 20 years ago or 2 years ago, you'll always be important members of the JWU family. Next week, we begin a fall semester unlike any in our school's history. Although our campus environments will look much different, the drive, determination, and work ethic of our students are as strong as they've ever been. In the College of Hospitality Management, our students will continue to gain portable skills that can be applied to any sector of the hospitality industry. I'm sure our presenter can attest this important aspect of a JWU education, and it becomes critical during times like these. If you're in a position to give back today, please consider a gift directly to the College of Hospitality Management. Your gift will provide flexibility to the college throughout the year, and you'll help prepare the next generation of hospitality leaders. We've shared the link in the chat window, and I thank you in advance for your generosity. We sincerely hope that you enjoyed this evening's session, Pinot Noir, Coastal versus Inland, part of the JWU for You family of programming. Through JWU for You, alumni can engage in informative and interesting discussions related to professional development, social, and avid interest topics. Next month, we'll be learning about the classic spirit, bourbon. Oh, my script. What happened? With Professor Linda Patine. Mark your calendars for Wednesday, September 30th for the full listing of upcoming events. Please visit our events calendar at alumni.jwu.edu. We appreciate your attendance and wish you a wonderful night. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Patrick. Miss you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
That was awesome.
Thank you. Good.
Oh, the next
Great
one
night.
is perfect.